Hi, I'm Dana and welcome back to another episode of Learning to be Autistic. I'll link episode 1 up here, but the basis of it is that I was diagnosed at 21 and went, oh crap, I've got to figure out who I am, not only as a person, but also as an autistic person, and learn to live authentically as an autistic person. And it's been a journey. So I decided to start this little series talking about how I've learned to be more authentically autistic, and so far it's been a fun little time over here. So today I really wanted to share my experiences when it comes to letting people know that I'm autistic. Because when I was first diagnosed, I didn't want to tell anyone. I was really scared and anxious and nervous about people knowing. Yeah, and I think that's valid. I didn't know if people were going to react kindly. A lot of people can be very shitty, but I'm the kind of person that's kind of hyper aware that sometimes being anxious and being autistic can make me come across as quite rude. You know, if I'm especially quiet, if I'm especially awkward, just certain ways that I come across sometimes I know can be really awkward and come across as rude and like I'm snobbish. So I personally will drop it in now fairly early. Like, I very much decided to just start letting people know, and if they're shitty about it or if they have a bad opinion, I know I don't want them in my life. It just makes it easier to know who I don't want around. But back when I was first diagnosed, I was terrified of telling people. It was really fucking scary to me. And I think I could have really used a video like this that's just someone being like, here's how people have reacted to me. Pure and simple, just here's the experiences, positive and negative. This is what happens, you know? Obviously there's 1,001 different reactions people can have. Some people will be horrible, some people will be really nice, some people understand, some people don't. You know, this is not the be all and end all of experiences of telling people you're autistic. These are just my experiences. So the very first person I actually really told was my mother. Because for me, my mum had to come to my autism assessment with me. And it was really quite awkward because she was just describing things from my childhood and being like, but that's normal, isn't it? And the assessment dude was like, no, they're autistic traits, they're not normal. So it was already, she wasn't impressed, essentially. It was a very tense car ride home. And after about 20 minutes of silence, she was like, so you're autistic then? And I was like, yeah, we've just done that whole 2-hour thing. And then he gave me the bit of paper and said, you're autistic. That was him deciding I'm autistic, Mum. And she was just very unimpressed. She didn't have much to say after that. We got home and my brother was like, how did it go? And I was like, I'm autistic. And he went, oh right, so that's you and our other brother now then. And I went, sure is. And that was that. The family just ignored it. No one else mentioned it. I don't really see the rest of my family, so no one else really had the chance to find out and mention it. But I think they would have more or less reacted the same. It's just, we don't give a fuck, continue to mask and act like you're one of us, please. And I can't do it. So then after like having that with my family and having a cop out, I came home. And when my, at the time, partner got in from work, he was like, how did it go? What's been said? And I was like, I'm autistic. And he was like, I thought you were. I was like, I know you did. And that was that, because he's also autistic and we'd been talking about it for like 2 years. So it was very much just, it's been confirmed by a professional. Knew it would be. You know, it was really quite affirming and validating after what I'd had from my family. It was what I expected. I'm not mad about it. It wasn't really positive or negative. It was just, yeah, confirmation received. At the time, I was spending a lot of time at a place doing a lot of work that I didn't really get paid for and sort of being taken advantage of. But there was another person that was working there that was in the same situation. And after a couple of weeks, I was kind of like, I want to tell someone. So I chose him because he was incredibly unoffensive and just, I knew he wouldn't say anything particularly mean, basically. And I was like, yeah, it's a good starting point. So I was like, oh yeah, I remember that assessment I said I was going for, and I'd like gotten a diagnosis, and then everyone like thought it was going to be bad, so I had to confirm like, no, it's a mental diagnosis and I am okay. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, I'm autistic. And this was where I got the first time that someone went, oh really? You don't seem autistic. My brother's autistic and he's like really different to you. And I was like, alright. Thanks for the imposter syndrome. I'm loving that feeling right now. And that's a common one. I've been told a lot that I don't look autistic, I don't seem autistic, but I'm not like their brother, son, mother, cousin, fucking aunt, nephew, whoever else. And it's like, yeah, I'm not a 5-year-old boy obsessed with Thomas the Tank. He would have known. Oh my God. Following on from there, I've not really known that many people, to be honest with you. There's only a few other experiences I can tell you about. I forgot to mention that I also told my boss while I was working at that place. And he went on to tell me, and I don't quite remember if he was telling me about himself as a child or about his son, but he gave me the whole like, no, it was him. He told me that they thought he had been autistic as a kid because he was like really intellectually smart and he walked on his tiptoes, and I was just sat there like, okay. And then he mentioned that his son also walks on his tiptoes, and I was like, yeah, but he's like the friendliest, smiliest, like nothing autistic about him kind of kid. Like, it was kind of odd, but it's one of those situations where he was clearly trying to relate and make me feel comfortable, so I don't feel like it was shitty. It was just a little misguided. So the next person I told was the GP that I had at the time, who then later told my mum that she had a UTI when it was actually 2 types of cancer. So I don't trust the guy too much, you know, don't trust the surgery an awful lot. They'd received a letter of my diagnosis, but I still, next time I went to them for my horrific mental health issues, had to be like, you do know I'm autistic, right? And they were like, oh my God, are you? Well, if you're autistic, how are you depressed and anxious? And I was like, because I get depressed and anxious while also being autistic. Like, that's what bothers me the most, is when medical professionals respond poorly. Because with anyone else, I'm like, you don't know. Like, there's 1,000,001 different invisible disabilities out there. We can't know them all. I get you. I don't mind being a bit patient. But you're a medical fucking professional. You should know better. You should know about autistic people. It bothers me a lot. And having mental health issues while also being autistic means that you get referred around a lot. I've had many a referral to many a person, and you phone them up and you have the whole little thing, and they're like, oh, but how does being autistic play into that for you? And I'm like, fuck if I know, pal. The amount of people that seem to think that, like medical professionals, that seem to think I understand exactly how like anxiety and depression presents in a neurotypical person, to be able to compare my experience is laughable. I don't know what's happening in a neurotypical head. I've just got mine, and it's a bit mad. So you get a lot of things like that from medical professionals, I've found. It might be very different if you don't have mental health issues. And from what I've heard, quite frankly, if you're in a different county in the UK, it's going to be a completely different experience. Never mind if you live like several cities away or in a different country. It's the support and knowledge about autism varies so much that it's mind-blowing. So I switched GP, and then I had to tell a different GP, like, oh, I have depression, anxiety and autism. And they were fucking great. The second GP that I had to tell was immediately like, oh, okay, do you prefer to be called someone with autism or an autistic person? I was like, I'm an autistic person. And they knew about shit. And they'd be like, okay, so I'll phone you at exactly this time. And I'd be like, fab. And they'd phone me at exactly that time. I still hate phone calls, but it's better than just, we'll phone you tomorrow, you know? When I first spoke to them on the phone, and I'd said, like, I'm autistic and I'm coming to talk to you about this, the woman phoned me back, like, the GP, the doctor, phoned me back to be like, okay, that's great. When you come in through these doors, go to this counter, say this, and then sit down and I'll come and get you. You know, I was given full instruction. I was not left in the dark wondering where the fuck I was meant to go, what I was meant to do. It was fantastic. Like, I genuinely can't put into words how much I appreciated that. And unfortunately, I then went and explained my entire life to her, and she went, oh, well, that's a bit much. I'm going to refer you to the mental health specialist. And he isn't quite as good, but the thing I really appreciate about him is that he doesn't assume shit. Like, the guy clearly, like, from what he has said and the things he's agreed with me on, clearly knows a good amount about, like, autistic people and autism in general. He's clearly not uneducated, but he still takes my word for things. Like, if I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really, like, get the effects of caffeine, I think it might be an ADHD symptom, he's like, oh really? I didn't know about that. Okay, we'll put that down. You know, there's no judgment, there's no you're wrong, it's just, oh, okay, maybe. I like that. Moving on, the next set of people I had to be like, hi, I'm autistic, was the job centre. No surprise, I told you I wasn't getting paid for the fucking job I was doing. So, again, I've had a relatively positive experience down the job centre that I'm autistic, honestly. I say that, but then I've just thought about it for like a minute, and honestly, it's just that their initial reaction was nice. Like, when I first went, they have you fill out 1,000,001 forms. So when I went, they were like, oh, you're autistic? And I was like, mm-hmm. And they were like, okay, so how's your mental health? How are you doing? And I was like, not well. I get very anxious. It's not a good time for me. And they, you know, on the one hand, they did put me forward for like different charities and groups to help with mental health and autistic people. On the other hand, they're very disorganised. They don't tell me where the fuck to go for them, so I just show up at the job centre and double the panic I need to be eventually like ushered into a room or upstairs or somewhere, and it's a bit of a nightmare and it makes me extremely anxious and I don't know where I'm going. I hate it. They did that. And they also assume that because I'm anxious, I'll prefer phone calls. But the job centre is literally like 2 streets away and I'd much rather just fucking go in, talk to the woman and leave rather than sit around waiting for this phone call. I don't like phone calls. But yeah, if you're better at being assertive than I am, because I very well could have said no to all these different appointments and shit that they set me up. Like, not all of them. You do have to go to some shit for the job centre, otherwise they don't give you money, pal. But for the most part, the different, like, they were electives, I suppose. I could choose to do them or not. But as a little people pleaser, as an anxious little bitch, I was just like, yeah, that sounds great, okay, yeah, can I leave now, please? I didn't enjoy it, didn't like it. But their general reaction, I'd say it was positive with a sprinkling of ignorance. And finally, people in social situations, just normal people out and about. Now, I won't lie, I've predominantly met other people that live in my girlfriend's shared house, people that my housemates brought home, or people at the 2 house parties and 1 gathering I went in the same location this year. However, it's been lovely. It's been really, really, really nice. One of the people that I met in my girlfriend's house share when I was like, basically, I'd gone into like the little shared room to have a smoke and then left again because there was someone fucking in there. And then they were like, you don't have to leave just because I'm here. So I went back in and then I was like, I don't actually want to fucking be here, but I'm going to have to sit down and like pretend I do want to be here now because he said that I can come back in. So I was sat there having all this going on in my head, and this guy sort of sat there looking like he might be doing the same sort of thing. And then I was like, shit, I haven't said anything. That's weird. I've not said a word. So I was like, oh, sorry, I'm just a bit awkward. And he was like, oh, we're all a bit awkward, aren't we, hon? And I was like, it's just because I'm really autistic. And he's like, yeah, so am I. And then we sort of looked at each other a second and carried on chatting. And then a while later I mentioned it to my girlfriend and she was like, oh yeah, he's autistic, he's nice, isn't he? And then there's a second guy that I also met in the same room of my girlfriend's house share called Chris. Chris is kind of an icon, he's kind of a legend. I had several very awkward conversations with him because I don't like to throw it out immediately, you know? I only did it with the other guy because I felt so cripplingly awkward and anxious that I was like, I need to fucking say something. Whereas I managed a few normally awkward conversations with Chris before. I don't remember what it was I said, but it was something very awkward and he sort of awkward chuckled and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm autistic, I'm just a bit awkward, I don't mean it in any certain way. And he launched into the story of, oh, I know someone who's autistic, and I was ready to have to like really train myself to not roll my eyes. And then he explained how it was his nieces, and he was like, oh yeah, it's like so misunderstood in women, isn't it? I bet you were probably like late diagnosed. They're really lucky to have been diagnosed as children, aren't they? It really needs more understanding. And I was like, we love Chris. Chris is an icon. Chris gets it. I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about my girlfriend. Tinder is very, very easy because at some point in a conversation, someone's going to be like, so what do you do for work? And I don't fucking work. So I have to sound like I have my shit together or be like, oh, I actually make YouTube videos about being autistic. And then you get the double whammy of, I'm a fucking YouTuber, so get used to that. And I'm autistic. You get it in one smooth slide. It might not be that smooth. I think it's a smooth slide. So that was how I told my girlfriend. And she just sort of went with it and we carried on having a conversation because we weren't actually dating yet. And then I I feel like I did mention it on our first date, because I remember her telling me about someone in her family that was autistic. But again, it was in a very, like, a way where it was clear that she knew all autistic people are different, and this is just her experience of being around an autistic person, you know? I didn't really think anything of it. It was just a shared experience moment of, you know, it was just a moment where she was sharing her experience of having been around an autistic person. It wasn't positive, it wasn't negative, it was just a conversation, you know? It was nice. And finally, the thing that's convinced me that I finally actually go to good parties and am around good people is the amount of times, like, when I'm pissed, I will tell everyone I'm autistic. I don't know what it is. Once I'm really drunk, I'm just like, I'm autistic. And it's probably a bit much. So I try to, like, narrow it down, suppress it a bit. I try to act like a normal person despite being drunk, but I don't do it very well because I'm drunk. So at these parties, I've quite often mentioned to people I'm autistic. And honestly, I think 10 times out of 10, they've told me that they are also either autistic or neurodivergent in some way. And we've had the moment of like, yes, bitch. And it's a good time. You know, like, some of the past parties I went to definitely would not have had that reaction. That's where I'm aware that, like, these are just my experiences, and lots of other people have probably told someone at a party they're autistic and not had it go well. But try and find good people, and then everyone turns out to be neurodivergent or queer. Right at the end here of what might be my longest video to date, because I just keep rambling, I'm very, very fortunate. I think I've gotten extremely lucky that none of my situations in telling people that I'm autistic have been dangerous, and nothing's ever been, like, happened to me physically, medically. No one's ever been, like, a complete asshole. I did miss a couple that happened at the job centre that weren't as positive, but, like, I sort of have out-of-body experiences while I'm there, and I don't really remember what they said. I just remember being really angry about it when I got out. Okay? But yeah, I'm very, very privileged. You know, like, I think it helps that I'm a woman. I think neurodivergent women, especially autistic women, were quite often seen as being, like, cute and quirky rather than weird in the way that a lot of men are. You know, I think there's lots of, like, societal privileges that I have that have made it easier for me than it will be for a lot of other people. Have meant that I've gotten much more positive reactions than a lot of other people would. But I mean, I'm not gonna, like, make up older ones just to feel like I'm one of you, you know? These are just my experiences. Some of them are a little more negative, some of them are a little more positive. That's just how it's been for me. I am so done with talking. So whoever you are and wherever you are, I hope you have a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And I'll see you again in a few days.